Welcome to the Story Clicks podcast, where we explore ways to grow business, develop creativity, and live better. I'm your host, Māris Prindulis. Feeling drained working from home? With kids in tow, focusing becomes a Herculean task. But it's not just about focus. The lack of social energy and support can also be draining when you don't have access to a co-working community. Today, our special guest will unveil 5 factors to consider before joining or creating a co-working space. Let's welcome Bernie J Mitchel, a passionate co-working advocate, blogger, and podcaster. Since 2010, Bernie has collaborated with co-working spaces in London and Europe. According to Bernie, co-working spaces are the heartbeat of the local economy. They offer freelancers, creators, and small businesses the perfect platform to network, grow, and connect with the community. Bernie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show and sharing your co-working insights.
Hi, Marius. I am genuinely, I know you're supposed to say that at the beginning of every podcast episode, but I'm genuinely excited to be here.
Thank you, Bernie. I'm genuinely excited to have you on the show as well. And I'm curious to learn about your co-working insights because I know co-working is your passion. So tell us, please, what does value-driven co-working mean to you?
That is, I know that sounds a bit esoteric kind of thing, but there's co-working is like people going to basically going to a room in their local area and sitting at a desk with their laptop, but there's a lot more that goes on with that. And the value-driven thing is around maybe 15 years ago, a group of people got together in Italy and they worked out what the co-working values were. And it was accessibility, collaboration over competition. There's 3 more, which I'll remember in a minute. And people started to work around these things and say, right, the big one for me is collaboration over competition, which I think when businesses go after each other, it creates distance, it creates destruction, it creates, a lot of negative energy. And when people collaborate with each other, things come out of that you never knew would happen. So I've got, probably thousands of real life examples where people said, "Oh, she do this, you come in here and do this." It's like, I know you're a musician, so it's like when a band gets together and jams, like stuff happens that you didn't even know was going to happen, and it's that kind of energy that I think I know is available. And there's a group of us, and probably about 2015, the co-working industry split in a little way. There were all the people that wanted to there's like the real estate conversation where people wanted to rent desks. And then there were the people that wanted to contribute to their local community and, build connections and build things together. And it's not necessarily that one side's better than the other, but when COVID hit, all the people that were just renting desks, they had contracts and everything. They relied on legal things, and they offered all these things like yoga studios and free beer on tap. And a lot of those things weren't available. And the members in those co-working spaces got into arguments about, I want you to reduce my monthly rent or, membership fee because you're not giving me half the stuff I said I'd have. And they said, "Oh, you signed a contract, so you have to honor the contract." I know, but you're not keeping you. And it got all like that. Whereas over here, there are hundreds of examples of co-working spaces where, someone like you owned a co-working space. It had to close or off, adjust how it operated. And people kept on paying their membership because they wanted the co-working community to survive. And the value was in the connections and the people. And because they were like micro and small businesses, they all knew what it was like at that moment in time. So there was a big difference in both were kind of people giving money for a desk, but the energy was very different.
You have expressed that co-working has had a big impact on your career. Could you please tell more about it?
So from about 2005 to 2010, I've always done marketing, but I also ran networking groups and done lots of events. And I ran networking groups where people would come along and say like, "Hi, I'm Marius and I can sell you some design wear. And I'm Bernie, I can sell you some podcasting or stuff." And then, I walked into a place called the Innovation Warehouse and started working there. And then I realized that this is what I was really interested in is people working together. And what happened at the end of the networking groups is we'd have our meeting and we'd all sort of pretend not to pitch each other. And people did make really good connections there. It was a really, really good group of people. But then some people would go off to work and then others would sit in the restaurant or cafe or meeting room in a hotel and get their laptops out. And then that's when the real layer of conversation happened. It's a bit like with a podcast, you interview people and then after the interview's done, everyone relaxes and they just start talking normally and something really deep and meaningful comes up. So it was that kind of, I'm going to say frequency that got in there. And then I just met so many people, bumped into people, went to conferences around Europe, and just everything knocks onto something else. How I found Story Brand, you could probably, track that back to something that happened in a co-working space.
From what you're saying, I hear that one of your values is connection over competition. And it seems to me that that is something you're finding in co-working space.
For sure. There's, I think a lot of it is to do with how we show up for each other. And one of my favorite stories ever is we have there's a charity that a youth charity I'm a trustee of, and we got involved with them in 2019, and we ran an event in a co-working space in Hackney called Mainyard, and we had people who were, like you and me, freelancers and micro business owners, whatever you want to call themselves, who worked in a co-working space. There were people that owned or ran a co-working space, and then the young people from Urban MBA. And when I say young, I mean like 18 to 30, that kind of age range. And we sat around and talked about, what it means to start your own project, business, freelance practice, working with other people. And one of the reasons the people from Urban MBA came is because Hackney is a very ethnically diverse area, but it's full of co-working spaces that are pretty expensive and full of like nice affluent white people that used to work for Saatchi and Saatchi. And it's, very, the what we call like gentrification is very prominent there. And a lot of people who from Urban MBA didn't realize or didn't feel like they were allowed, in air quotes, to go to a co-working space. And then going further on down the line, in the middle of lockdown, and then people started in the co-working assembly, which is like a group of co-working spaces that all help each other out in London that I co-founded. People from the co-working assembly helped Urban MBA run their annual London Fashion Week fashion show. And it ended up being at the Ministry of Sound co-working space, not the Ministry of Sound nightclub. But what people saw online was Urban MBA, London Fashion Week, Ministry of Sound. So it looked, like there was a fashion show run by Urban MBA at the Ministry of Sound, because people just see things really quickly online. And there was one designer there who was already taking £4,000 a month in online sales. And this was in the middle of COVID, which makes it even better. And then at the end of last year, which we're recording this in 2023, so at the end of 2022, he passed £1 million in revenue. And that London Fashion Week event was in October 2020. And that whole event came out from Fiona, who works at the Ministry of Sound, organising the space with the co-working space. Loads of people just chipped in with other different things and sponsored drinks and stuff like this. And, in the middle of COVID, it was a lot to put that on anyway, but people just all helped. So that's the biggest revenue increase that someone in that fashion show had. But all of those people got catapulted in their own way, and that all happened. That all came out of a cup of coffee at a breakfast. You know.
That's awesome. So basically, being open-minded, being open to connection with other people, and seeing how it can be like win-win for everybody.
Yeah, there's a whole movement that's going on. B Corp is the one people would have heard of the most, and when the guy from Patagonia gave his company to the world, and that kind of thing, and I particularly love Patagonia, but there's another movement in the UK called the kindness economy, which was developed by a lady called Mary Portas, who about 20 years ago, she was the first woman to work for Harvey Nicks, or be on the board of Harvey Nicks, which is the department store in London. And she just noticed she's one of the people to capture this already existing conversation about being a consumer is bad for ourselves and bad for the planet. We think we need to buy this stuff, but we don't really. And then being more conscious of how we do business is the better long-term thing. So there's a kind of like Jack Welch, who used to run GE, would famously sack the bottom 10% of employees every year. Whereas I think, I can't remember the name of the company. There's another company, which the name will come to me as I explain it. I think it was Costco. So if you track their share value over time from like 1970 to 2015, Costco takes massive care of its employees. People stay there for longer, and their share value was just constantly gone up incrementally, non-stop for 30 years. Whereas General Electric, which would sack people as part of their what we thought back then was a great business practice, it would sack the bottom 10%. Their share price fluctuates a lot, and if you were to invest in Costco in whatever it is in the 70s, your as a shareholder, your return on value would be way more than General Electric, and Costco took massive care of their staff, and General Electric wasn't quite so kind. So it's that kind of just being nice to people.
So kindness pays off.
It does, and I think we've been programmed to think that, like in business, you kind of you have to just. There's people I know who think they're being bad at business if they don't screw someone over. They just think that's the way you should conduct it, and there's still voices that are very prominent in the business space nowadays, and you've got to be number one, you've got to be first, and you've got to be all this kind of shit. And then there's like, we could just go further together.
We could go further together. Love that. Awesome. And we should put in show notes that link about kindness economy. I think that's a great subject.
I can I've just remembered the co-working values now. So sorry. So whenever I say that out loud, I forget them. So it's community, openness, collaboration, sustainability, and accessibility. And they're going to be, at some point, they're going to be updated because they're 15 years old. And a lot of that stuff is still very, very relevant. But like inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility are massive engines of the co-working movement nowadays. Because very often, about 5 years ago, a lot of the particularly in London, a lot of the imagery on websites was of like two dudes who looked a little bit like Mark Zuckerberg, having a coffee and holding an Apple Mac laptop. And I drink coffee and have an Apple Mac laptop and have a hoodie, but it was just a very kind of white male dominated existence, which is not an accurate representation of the broad ethnic diversity that is in London. And a lot of real estate and co-working conferences are just lots of white men telling everyone else how to run their businesses. And again, that's not a accurate representation, either gender wise or ethnicity wise, of the industry.
I should put these values as well in show notes. So my question is, If you could go back in time and give yourself 5 pieces of co-working space advice, what would that be?
Wow, great question, Marius. So the the one I always tell people is build your community before you need it. And there are so many examples of, like, my friend Trevor ran a space called Coworking Niagara. My friends Anna and Fernando opened one of the first co-working spaces in Lisbon it must be like 2008. And then Indie Hall, which is in Philadelphia. All of those spaces started by people gathering in a cafe and working together. And then they went, oh, should we buy a building? And I've met more than one person over the years that has brought a building and then tried to fill it, rather than, it would be cheaper for them to buy pizza for a group of people every week in a cafe and get them talking and then find out what they needed, rather than buying a building and hoping people will buy a desk in it. And then you might find out that, you, like in everything, you think you know what people want, and then you ask them and they tell you something completely different. Like in that book, The Mum Test, where before you build anything, you should always ask people. So build your community before you need it. This isn't quite so glamorous, but people hope, including me, that you can just have a room full of desks and lots of freelancers and creators and independent workers will come in. But actually, the real money in co-working, the consistent, reliable money in co-working, is from having offices. Because in the UK, people will, commit to a 6-month contract, and very often they'll pay upfront for an office, whereas people who are, freelancer consultants probably won't commit to a desk for a year, or they'll go there. They'll then decide. They're much more fluid in how they use space, or even inconsistent, which is a much crueler word, but they're inconsistent how they use space. So your community part and fun will come from having a bit of co-working space in an open office, and then the hardcore revenue that will be the foundation is from selling offices to people, which sounds very uncommunity, but
Mm-hmm.
then you have to, but then
Mm-hmm.
so number 3 is, then you have to find a way to get people to come out of their offices and speak to each other. And getting one of the best people I ever met in my life was someone called Tajinder, who ran a space called Bathtub to Boardroom. And while she was the CEO of the whole operation, she just knew everybody in the building, and she would go upstairs to the offices and talk to people, come downstairs and say, I've just spoken to this person upstairs, they need this. And she would make everyone come to lunch. There was a lunch they put on specially once a week or once a month, but then she would go around and pull people out of the offices to come down and sit around a big table. And it was, I mean, essentially that was free. And she'd just say, where are you eating lunch today? Oh, I'm just going to do it at my desk. That's really unhealthy. Come downstairs and meet some people. And she she had the character to be able to do this, but people would sit around the table eating their, in England, we love sandwiches. So they'd open their, sad little box of sandwiches and they'd eat their sandwiches and talk to other people.
Yeah.
And that, like, food and getting together for a little bit on a regular basis, is where all the connections happen. Whereas if you do a big grand networking event and have Bruce Springsteen come along and play, and I know Maria Montessori come and talk about education, it's like, it's a good thing to do, but it's like almost too much. Whereas micro interactions are really good. The other part is, which is really, really difficult to do, is connect with your local community. And there's I think it was like 2018, I did this course at a place called Space 4 in London. And it was a 1-day workshop, actually. And Stephanie said, as part of the workshop, sorry, let me explain the workshop. There was was about 15 people who ran or worked in co-working spaces, and we were all so proud of how community driven we were and all about community. And then at one point she said, okay, our next exercise is we're going to go down into the street and we're going to go into shops and cafes and meet people, and we're going to talk about what community and co-working is. And none of us wanted to do it, which was half the exercise was like, oh, notice how you're all big on community, but you don't want to go and talk to people in the community. Oh, is that really part? Do we need to do that? And she made us all go and do it. And that space over the years has just worked very, very hard to find out all the groups in the local area. It buys food from cafes in the local area. Every Wednesday they do a thing called a community lunch, where it's an open invite. Everyone gets there. You put £5 in a pot, or you send them £5 electronically, and they go to a local restaurant. And they've been doing this for, I don't know, 6-7 years now. They go to a local restaurant with a big pile of money and say, how much food can we get for that? And they take it back to the co-working space and throw it in the middle of the table, and everyone dives in. And that one lunch gets them a massive connection with the local area, and they invite people from the local area into lunch, and they don't always come. But now, after it must be like 6 or 7 years, that co-working space is as important as the local pub or the local community center or the local church or the local mosque. It's I'm trying to, I've lost the words here. It's not just an office that no one knows what it does. Is that 4?
Yeah, that's 4. And that's a great example how actually you can avoid being isolated in your tower of co-working, right? So it's bringing the community in and actually thinking, okay, how can this be beneficial?
The last one is about connecting with other co-working space owners. And I think this is something to do with any business. Every time you hang out with people that do nearly exactly the same thing as you just learn lots. And in London, we've done, since 2014, we've run some form of group where people get together. And in 2018, we made it a bit more structured. It's like once a month, we'll do an event in a co-working space, and we'll just invite loads of people. So we get about 40 people come once a month, and we put on some panel or workshop or stuff like that. And it's almost like we pretend to, I mean, the panels and workshops are really valuable. Don't want to take away from that, but we kind of pretend we're doing a panel and workshop, because then people come for that. But then what they do is connect with each other and ask about what software they use. There's co-working spaces that had to close for different reasons, and they've come to this event and said, we need to close because the landlord put the rent up or something like this. And then from that co-working space, different other co-working spaces have taken the furniture, have signed all the members over, and just made the effort, made the agony of closing a business easier because people helped out. And the same way as when people started things, so many people come to that and say, oh, what should I do? I was going to spend £10 million on this piece of software. And they said, oh no, you can do that in Google Docs. So, there's tiny little things you don't know you need that come. And one of the, when in lockdown, so we did our last in-person event at the very beginning of March. I just got back from Story Brand in Nashville, and we did our last in-person event at City University, and then lockdown happened. And for every Tuesday and Thursday until September 2020, we ran a half-hour Zoom call, and people could come in and that kind of made the community even stronger than it already was, because people came and asked very direct and raw business questions like, it was like a room full of people trying to save their businesses at the same time, and there was no messing around. And people would say, do I need to go out and buy £10,000 worth of personal protection equipment? Do I do this? Do I close? Do I go online? What app do I use? and people really helped each other out. But one of the things was some people who had led us to believe that they were, the richest, most successful person in the world came to that call and said, I am really, really screwed. And then people helped them out. So it made it created a level of honesty that I don't think was available beforehand. And so my point there is when you find out at what point other people in your industry are, I think it lowers your anxiety.
Oh, yes, and this is a wonderful story that also shows how powerful supportive community can be. Awesome. Thank you. So, let's try to summarize the key points for our listeners. Let's see if I got them right. First, build a community before you invest in a building. Second, selling offices is the key to consistent revenue. Third, encourage meaningful interactions among coworkers to cultivate a thriving coworking environment. Fourth, engage with local community to contribute to the economy and create a sense of belonging. Fifth, connect with other coworking space owners for valuable insights and guidance.
Yep. Industry peers, as we like to say.
Yes. Awesome. Is there anything else as a kind of concluding theme regarding this that you would like to add?
I think I'm very enthusiastic about co-working spaces, obviously. But there's one of the things that happened in lockdown and COVID is it accelerated the future of work by about, 10, 20 years, who knows, because people stopped thinking that they had to get on a train, travel for half an hour or an hour and go into town. There's this whole thing, particularly in Western society, of like, we need to commute into town, and very often we'll close our computer at home, put it in a bag, take it to an office after sitting on a train or in a car, open it and carry on working. And when we stay in our local community, we spend all our money with local businesses. We go to local restaurants and sandwich shops and spend our money there. And then we see more people in our local community, and just our sense of ownership and connection locally goes higher, is much higher. And there's a lot of data to support that, in those type of environments or communities, crime goes down. Young people do better because they see people, they're more familiar. And it has a lot of knock-on effects. And when we spend, like, Islington Council did a load of research, I think it was like 5 years ago, and I think it's probably even more true, is when we spend £1 with a local business, that pound goes around the local economy 4 times. When we go and spend it with a big corporation, and we're not doing anything wrong by running a supermarket or something there, but like, if we go into the financial district and we go to a branded place that's owned by a big company, that money's just left the local community. So no one's going to really benefit in the local area because we spent our money somewhere else. And we're not doing anything wrong, but it's not growing our local area. And that's one of my big hopes going forward. There's again, hundreds of examples where this was already happening before COVID, but local authorities in London are more alert to that than ever. So there's been this big rush of local government that's not in the centre of town, but on the 6, 5 and 4. If you live in London, it's divided into travel card zones, but 6, 5 and 4 are opening more co-working spaces than ever because people stay in the local area. And there's a concept called 15-minute city, which is what I'm a big fan of. So that's my final thought, Marius.
Awesome. Love that. I have 2 more questions. Also, I need to mention that I think it will be really fun to have you back on, and we could talk more about emails, which is your other passion. But before that, my question is, what has made you laugh lately, like super hard?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that makes me laugh the most is my son, because he does this little thing. I'm being all like really serious, like, oh, I've got lots of very important stuff to do. And he comes up and like pokes me in the face and says, "Is there a little, are you trying to be all harder? Being all busy about co-working, are you, Bernie?" Pretty much exactly like that. And I just laugh like I cannot help but laugh. And he probably does that to me every day. And I really appreciate it because laughter is like so important to just, is it releases oxytocin in your body or something? I don't know. There's some chemical reaction that happens, So I really appreciate that. And a lot of the time he's just deliberately trying to annoy me, but he breaks my, unnecessarily serious energy force field, just thinking about it now. We were, I was trying to, we were walking around here the other day and I was trying to explain something to him and I was being so unnecessarily serious about it. And he was bargaining with me and I was trying to get my point out and I just couldn't, I was walking alive for 10 minutes trying to be a serious domineering parent. And I was like crying with laughter at the end of it, which kind of helps. So I'm grateful for that. Very grateful for that.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the phrase about children are spiritual teachers God has sent our way.
I think that's true. Like he has a very good sense of humor, and he disables the kind of oh well I'm so busy and significant, So I count on that, and we get to spend a lot because we don't commute. We get to spend a lot of time together. So for at least an hour and a half every day, we're walking to school and back. It's not an hour and a half there and back. It's like 45 minutes, but we often walk. So we spend a lot of time together, which we didn't used to do because we were like running for the bus and running for the tube in London. So I'm grateful for that too. Lots of gratitude coming here at the end of the podcast.
That's beautiful. So what are you focusing on in your work? Like where are you going? What's interesting for you in this upcoming season?
So one of the things I did was I worked with our friend Susan. She helped me. I just needed to like package Bernie Mitchell a bit better. And I looked a lot at how I work and where my energy is. I like being part of projects with other people, but I don't like having clients for 6 months. That kind of, there's something, I get very easily bored. So if I'm like working with a client for 6 months, I kind of, I don't know, fall asleep. I know that's not a very good business practice. And then Susan said, you should do a whole coaching day. And my whole energy is into spending like, 5 or 6 hours with someone and going through their whole strategy, business, looking for points in their co-working business where they could do things like use email better, use their events better, what their mission, core values and everything like that is, and how those, everyone likes talking about core values, and then like how does it actually make me money and show up my business practice, and how do I communicate with my staff? And if all the time when I'm with people they ask me questions, and if I don't know the answer, I know someone who does. So there's very specific technical things I have no idea. I don't know about Wi-Fi. I mean, I use Wi-Fi all the time, but I can't advise you to set up Wi-Fi. But I've got 3 people I can put you in touch with that I trust and I've known ages. So I'm doing that, and then I've as part of that, my friends Robert and Hector have a company called Syncaroo, which can basically do an audit of all the software and how your whole co-working space works, and that is to help people save money and save headspace. So that means that I was always very good at events, so I can work intensely for a very short amount of time and keep doing that. So it's a lot. So the main message there is about, managing energy rather than, my 6-month program or, all the other stuff we do. And then every month we do a in-person event in London called the London Coworking Assembly Breakfast Show. So that's getting people together. And then in October, we're going to Amsterdam for part of the Workspace Design Show, where we're going to get lots of co-working. That's a big exhibition, but we partner with the Workspace Design Show, which is in London and in Amsterdam. And we just sort of tell loads of people to show up and take part. So we'll be doing a breakfast show at the Workspace Design Show. That's it.
Awesome. So where people can find you, and probably it's going to be written somewhere.
If you type into your favorite search engine, Bernie J Mitchel, you might get an artist from Canada or Wales, because there's two artists with the same name.
You can send questions to him as well.
And questions to him. But that would take you to my website and LinkedIn. The best place to hit me up is LinkedIn, but you can find it all by typing Bernie J Mitchel into your favorite search engine.
Great. Thank you. Bernie, it's been a pleasure to be with you. Great insights. I've learned new stuff, and look forward to have you back on in near future, and let's talk about emails.
We will. I love email. I send not just emails, email newsletters every week. And I still have your little fridge magnet that you brought to London. That's come from our home in London to our home in Spain.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. Awesome.
That's cool. Thank you for your time today.
Great. Woo! We've done it. And that concludes today's episode of our podcast. I hope you found these key factors insightful and entertaining. Remember, if you're feeling mentally exhausted from working at home and struggling to maintain focus, co-working spaces can provide a refreshing change of scenery and supportive community to help you thrive. As always, check out the show notes in your app or go to storyclicks.us/podcast, where you can find resources mentioned in this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our podcast, share it with someone who might benefit from this, and leave us a rating or review. Your feedback helps us to improve the show and bring you more great content. Thank you for tuning into this episode of our Story Clicks podcast, where we explore ways to grow your business, develop your creativity, and live better.